After detailed detective work, experts now believe this is the only surviving piece of clothing worn by Elizabeth I.
On March 24, 1603, Elizabeth, England's last Tudor monarch, died at the age of 69. Her passing marked the end of an era defined by political stability, cultural flourishing, and religious conflict.
Possible causes of death include cancer or pneumonia, but Elizabeth's use of lead and mercury-based makeup for decades in increasingly liberal doses certainly at least contributed to her declining health.
Official accounts describe a natural death after a period of illness. But inconsistencies in reports, rumors at court, and modern historical analysis suggest there may be more to the story. Elizabeth's death remains a puzzle historians are still trying to solve. The final days of the Elizabeth I. By the early 1600s, Elizabeth I had ruled England for 45 years, an unusually long reign for the time. She was 69, considered old in an era when average life expectancy was under 50, and her health was clearly declining. Reports from courtiers and ambassadors describe her as weak and fatigued, struggling to maintain the energy and presence that had defined her rule. Even in her last weeks, she remained deeply involved in governance, signing documents and issuing instructions for the kingdom. Yet, the accounts of her final days are inconsistent. Some observers noted a gradual decline. Others described sudden bouts of fever and weakness. She reportedly refused to eat much, a factor that may have accelerated her deterioration. Elizabeth's death marked more than the passing of a monarch. It was the symbolic end of the Tudor dynasty. The succession of James VI of Scotland to the English throne as James I created both relief and uncertainty, leaving historians to wonder if the Queen's death was truly natural or influenced by the immense pressures, political intrigue, and potential foul play surrounding the court. Understanding Elizabeth's final days requires context. Decades of ruling under immense stress, navigating wars, religious conflict, and the constant scrutiny of her people and allies. Her body may have given out, but her life had been defined by the constant balancing act of power, image, and survival, a pattern that, even in death, left questions lingering about what really happened behind the palace walls. By early 1603, Elizabeth was visibly frail, and whispers at court suggested that England's legendary queen might finally be nearing the end. And then, the news happened. Death at 69. Elizabeth I's death on March 24, 1603, has long been presented in history books as a natural, peaceful passing. Yet the closer you look, the murkier the picture becomes. She was 69, frail, and reportedly suffering from what chroniclers of the day described as fever and weakness. But medical knowledge at the time was rudimentary. Terms like ague and flux were used to describe conditions we now understand as pneumonia, influenza, or other infections, but nothing definitive. In her final weeks, Elizabeth reportedly spent long hours in bed, a remarkable shift for a queen, renowned for her vitality. Courtiers noted she had little appetite and complained of fatigue, while her attendants recorded bouts of confusion and cold extremities. Letters from foreign ambassadors hint at intermittent fevers and chills, describing her as thin and fragile, a far cry from the commanding presence she had projected for decades. One ambassador from the Low Countries wrote that Elizabeth appeared older than her years and weaker than expected, yet her mind remained sharp. This juxtaposition of physical decline and mental alertness is a recurring theme in descriptions of her final days. Her death coincided with a period of political uncertainty. Elizabeth's childlessness had created a succession crisis for decades. Though James VI of Scotland was the next in line, the unification of the crowns was far from guaranteed in the minds of English courtiers. Reports indicate that Elizabeth's death while natural in appearance, came amid whispers of tension among court factions. Some courtiers feared unrest, while foreign diplomats closely monitored events, aware that any instability could shift the balance of power in Europe. Accounts from contemporaries also reveal contradictions. Some witnesses claim she passed away quietly, surrounded by devoted attendants. Others describe sudden worsening of symptoms, with episodes of confusion and difficulty breathing. These inconsistencies have long puzzled historians. Could the fatigue and fever simply be the result of old age compounded by decades of stress? Or might there have been other contributing factors, such as infections exacerbated by a weak immune system, chronic illnesses, or even stress-induced decline? Elizabeth's lifestyle may offer further clues. Despite her public image as a disciplined ruler, she often worked long hours, delayed meals, and faced immense mental strain. Chronic stress has long been linked to compromised immunity and cardiovascular problems, suggesting that the pressures of ruling for nearly half a century could have played a direct role in her physical decline. Some modern historians speculate that the cumulative effect of sleepless nights, political tension, and physical strain may have weakened her body to the point where a relatively minor infection could have proven fatal. Interestingly, Elizabeth's death also highlights the limitations of 17th-century medicine. Physicians of the time relied on humoral theory, believing that imbalances in the body's four humors caused disease. Treatments often involved bloodletting or herbal remedies, which could have worsened a patient's condition. While there is no concrete evidence that such interventions contributed to Elizabeth's death, they underscore the challenges faced by even the wealthiest and most powerful individuals in that era. Public reaction to her death was profound. England mourned openly. Bells tolled in towns, shops closed, and subjects dressed in black. Chroniclers described tears flowing from every street and house, a testament to her long-lasting influence. The news spread quickly, prompting expressions of grief not only from her subjects but also from foreign dignitaries, who recognized the strategic importance of her passing. Her death was both a national loss and an international event, underscoring her role as a monarch whose life and decisions had ripple effects across Europe. Even centuries later, historians continue to debate whether Elizabeth's death was entirely natural. Some point to the inconsistencies in witness reports, while others examine the possibility of poisoning, a theory fueled by rival factions and court intrigue. Though there is no direct evidence, these theories persist, largely because Elizabeth's court was rife with political maneuvering. Every death of a monarch in the Tudor period carried potential political implications, making even a natural passing a subject of suspicion. Elizabeth's passing also underscores a human side of monarchy rarely discussed. Despite her carefully cultivated image of control and poise, her final days reveal vulnerability, dependence on others, and the inevitability of mortality. The queen, who had negotiated treaties, inspired armies, and shaped a nation's culture, ultimately faced the same fate as any ordinary person: illness and physical decline. Yet the mystique of her persona, combined with inconsistent reports and lingering court rumors, ensures that even her death remains a subject of fascination. Elizabeth's death cannot be separated from the context of her reign. It was a culmination of age, lifestyle, medical limitations, political pressure, and perhaps environmental or infectious factors. While the official story frames it as natural, the surrounding circumstances, the uncertainty of succession, inconsistencies in eyewitness accounts, and the ever-present tension of Tudor politics leave lingering questions. Historians continue to study her final days, not just to determine how she died, but to better understand the woman behind the legend, a ruler who carried the weight of a kingdom on her shoulders, even in the final moments of her life. To understand why Elizabeth's death caused such shock and speculation, it's worth looking back at her life. Elizabeth's life, legacy, and influence. Elizabeth was born in 1533, the daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. Her early years were fraught with danger. Anne Boleyn's execution when Elizabeth was just 2 years old cast a shadow over her childhood, and she spent much of her youth navigating a treacherous court where her legitimacy and safety were constantly questioned. Elizabeth ascended the throne in 1558 after the death of her half-sister, Mary I. England was politically divided, religiously volatile, and economically challenged. From the start, Elizabeth displayed remarkable political acumen, balancing Protestant and Catholic factions to stabilize her kingdom. Her skillful diplomacy and cautious decision-making allowed her to maintain authority in a male-dominated society, projecting both strength and intelligence. Culturally, her reign is often remembered as a golden age. Elizabethan England saw an unprecedented flowering of the arts. Shakespeare, Marlowe, and countless others produced work that defined English literature for centuries. Politically, the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 solidified England's naval dominance and bolstered national pride. Elizabeth's personal image as the Virgin Queen, untouchable and enigmatic, reinforced her authority and mystique, allowing her to navigate marriage negotiations, alliances, and court intrigues without being seen as weak. Her legacy extended beyond politics and culture. Elizabeth carefully managed propaganda, commissioning portraits and orchestrating her public persona to maintain loyalty and awe. She cultivated the idea of a monarch whose power was as much symbolic as practical, a queen whose personal life and choices fascinated subjects and diplomats alike. Yet, beneath this controlled image, Elizabeth faced immense pressures: succession anxiety, rebellion threats, plots against her life, and the constant awareness that her every decision carried profound consequences for her country. By the time of her death, Elizabeth had not only shaped England's political and cultural identity, but also created a personal legend. She was a master of public image, skilled in diplomacy, and a ruler whose policies and influence extended well beyond her lifetime. Her passing was not just a historical milestone. It marked the end of a figure who had, for decades, embodied England itself. Behind the curtains. Elizabeth's death, officially recorded as natural, has long been shadowed by inconsistencies, gaps, and whispers of intrigue. The longer historians dig into contemporary reports, letters, and ambassadorial accounts, the more contradictions emerge. Even for someone as meticulously observed as Elizabeth, the details of her final days are surprisingly murky. Eyewitness accounts from courtiers, ambassadors, and physicians often conflict. Some describe a slow and steady decline. The queen weakened gradually, rarely leaving her bed, her voice softening, her movements measured. Others report sudden bouts of fever or distress, episodes so severe that they seem to come out of nowhere. One ambassador noted that Elizabeth looked frail and ill, yet commanded attention with a sharpness that seemed almost defiant, highlighting the tension between her legendary mental acuity and her fragile body. Another contradiction lies in the timeline of her illness. Some sources claim she became seriously ill only days before her death, suggesting a sudden, possibly acute condition. Others insist she had been declining for weeks or months, implying a chronic illness exacerbated by age and stress. These discrepancies complicate any attempt to reconstruct the precise cause of death, leaving room for speculation about hidden factors, misdiagnosis, or even deliberate concealment of details by those close to her. Letters from foreign ambassadors offer additional intrigue. Diplomats from Spain, France, and the Low Countries monitored the Queen closely, reporting not only her symptoms but also the mood at court. Some letters mention sudden disappearances of courtiers or whispered meetings in corridors, hinting at power struggles that might have influenced what was recorded or what was deliberately left out about her condition. These snippets provide tantalizing clues that the death of a queen, even one as celebrated as Elizabeth, was never just a private matter. It was a political event with ramifications across Europe. Contradictions also appear in descriptions of her physical state. Contemporary chroniclers differ on whether she was emaciated or merely weakened, whether her skin was pale from illness or cold from age. Some letters describe her as coherent until the very end, while others suggest moments of confusion or delirium. These differing reports might reflect subjective interpretations by the observers, but they also raise the possibility that something unusual, an undiagnosed illness or other external factors, contributed to her death. Medical knowledge of the time further complicates matters. Physicians relied on the humoral theory of disease, attempting to balance blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile through treatments that often included bloodletting and herbal remedies. While these methods were standard, they could be harmful, particularly for someone as frail as Elizabeth. Historians debate whether such interventions might have hastened her decline, unintentionally masking or aggravating the underlying illness. Court politics also add a layer of complexity. Elizabeth had no direct heir, and succession anxieties had plagued England for decades. Even if her death was entirely natural, the high stakes surrounding the crown meant that details were often filtered through layers of political calculation. Courtiers might have downplayed or exaggerated aspects of her final days to shape the narrative, protect certain factions, or influence the incoming Stuart monarchy. Every recorded symptom, every letter describing her condition, existed within this web of intrigue, making it difficult to separate fact from perception or propaganda. Interestingly, some modern historians point to Elizabeth's own behavior as a contributing factor to the contradictions. She was notoriously private, even secretive, about her health. Unlike monarchs who publicly displayed their frailty to elicit sympathy or manipulate politics, Elizabeth often concealed weakness, appearing in public even when ill and managing her image until the very end. This deliberate control of information means that many contradictions may be the result of Elizabeth herself shaping the story, leaving historians to piece together the truth from fragments of observation and rumor. Finally, environmental and social factors may also have played a role. The Tudor court was crowded, stressful, and rife with disease. Poor sanitation, the prevalence of infectious illnesses, and constant travel between palaces could all contribute to a decline in health. In a sense, Elizabeth's death reflects the intersection of personal vulnerability and the structural realities of her time. A queen who bore immense responsibilities in a physically and politically challenging environment. The clues and contradictions surrounding Elizabeth's final days highlight a fundamental truth. Even the most observed life can harbor mysteries. Witness accounts vary, medical knowledge was limited, and the stakes of monarchy shaped every report. Whether her death was purely natural or influenced by other factors, the gaps in the record leave historians and us peering behind the curtains, trying to reconcile the legend of the Virgin Queen with the human reality of her final moments. But was her death truly natural, or could something darker have been at play behind the palace walls? The dark theories. While most historical accounts present Elizabeth's death as natural, her passing has long been shadowed by suspicion. The Tudor court was rife with intrigue, and a queen who ruled for 45 years had made as many enemies as allies. Even decades later, historians continue to debate whether foul play played a role, whether through poisoning, deliberate infection, or political manipulation. One of the most persistent theories involves poison. In an era when arsenic and mercury were common and deadly substances in both medicine and assassination, it is not implausible that someone might have used toxins to hasten the queen's demise. Some historians point to reports of sudden episodes of weakness and confusion as possible signs of arsenic poisoning. Yet there is no direct evidence. No contemporary physician reported identifying toxins, and Elizabeth's symptoms could easily be explained by age, illness, or stress. Still, the mere possibility captures the imagination. Court politics provide further context for suspicion. Elizabeth had no direct heir, and factions within her court had been vying for influence for decades. Foreign powers, including Spain and France, watched England closely, aware that a sudden death could shift the balance of power. Some letters from ambassadors hint at secretive meetings, sudden disappearances of certain courtiers, or whispered conversations in hallways. Could someone have sought to accelerate the succession for political gain? It's impossible to know, but the intrigue surrounding her death makes the question compelling. Another angle explores the role of disease and stress as quasi-deliberate factors. Elizabeth's body may have been weakened by decades of court pressure, rigorous schedules, and the chronic stress of leadership. Historians have noted that stress can exacerbate conditions like heart disease, pneumonia, or other infections. While this is not a deliberate conspiracy, it frames her death in a darker light. The very weight of ruling might have been lethal in itself, a slow-acting poison of duty and responsibility. Some theorists have speculated about the possibility of deliberate infection or poisoning via medicines administered by her attendants or physicians. Tudor medical treatments were often toxic by modern standards. Mercurial ointments, laxatives, and bloodletting were standard practice. It's conceivable that such interventions, intended to heal, may have inadvertently accelerated her decline. Combined with her frailty and immune vulnerability, this creates a scenario where even routine medical care could have had fatal consequences, blurring the line between natural death and negligence or intent. Historical precedent also fuels speculation. The deaths of other royals in the Tudor period, Henry VII's sudden illnesses, Mary, Queen of Scots' execution, and even the mysterious ailments of Edward VI, show that monarchs often died under circumstances that prompted suspicion. Elizabeth's death fits into a pattern where political stakes and court intrigue make natural causes only part of the story. Even if foul play was absent, the environment in which she lived amplified every vulnerability. Yet, despite centuries of speculation, no conclusive evidence has surfaced. Some modern forensic studies, using exhumed remains or contemporary letters, suggest that her death was consistent with age-related illness and the cumulative effects of stress and infection. Others argue that the sheer number of contradictions in eyewitness accounts makes it impossible to dismiss the possibility of external influence entirely. Ultimately, the dark theories surrounding Elizabeth's death reveal as much about the period as they do about the Queen herself. They highlight the precariousness of power, the danger inherent in monarchy, and the way that myths, rumor, and intrigue shape historical memory. Whether she died of natural causes, was hastened by misapplied medicine, or less likely, fell victim to deliberate foul play, Her passing remains one of history's most enduring mysteries. Elizabeth's death, real or imagined, underscores the fragility behind the veneer of monarchy. The Virgin Queen, immortalized in portraits and stories, faced the same vulnerabilities as anyone else, but with a twist. Her final moments became a political event, a historical puzzle, and a canvas for speculation that continues to this day. New evidence and modern investigations. Even 4 centuries after her death, Elizabeth I continues to fascinate historians, scientists, and the public alike. In recent decades, advances in historical research and forensic science have allowed scholars to re-examine the circumstances of her final days, offering fresh perspectives that challenge long-held assumptions. While no exhumation of her remains has been conducted, her body was interred in Westminster Abbey. The letters, diaries, ambassadorial reports, and court documents she left behind have become invaluable sources for piecing together her death. One significant angle comes from re-examining contemporary accounts with modern medical knowledge. Scholars have combed through letters and eyewitness reports, comparing descriptions of her symptoms with current understandings of illness. Fatigue, fever, loss of appetite, and confusion point to a possible combination of infections, nutritional deficiencies, and chronic health conditions. Some historians suggest she may have suffered from pneumonia or septicemia, while others consider cardiovascular issues, such as a heart attack or stroke, given her age and stress levels. Modern medical interpretations cannot be definitive without direct examination, but they provide plausible explanations for discrepancies in the historical record. Diplomatic correspondence has also shed light on her final days. Ambassadors from Spain, France, and the Low Countries meticulously reported on her health, noting subtle changes in appearance, mood, and behavior. These letters sometimes contradict each other, but they reveal a court alive with observation and gossip, where every minor symptom could have political implications. For instance, some letters describe moments of unexpected alertness amid apparent frailty, while others hint at episodes of confusion. Such contradictions are not necessarily evidence of foul play, but they illustrate how the Queen's final days were closely scrutinized and widely interpreted through political lenses. Historians have also examined diet, lifestyle, and environmental factors. Elizabeth's final weeks coincided with the harsh conditions of early 17th century England, including limited access to fresh produce in winter and the prevalence of infectious diseases. Combined with decades of chronic stress and long working hours, these factors likely weakened her immune system, leaving her vulnerable to illness. Additionally, Tudor medical practices may have unintentionally hastened her decline. Treatments such as bloodletting or purgatives, common for fevers and other ailments, could have further weakened her body rather than providing relief. Another avenue of investigation comes from cultural and political analysis. Researchers have explored how accounts of Elizabeth's death were filtered through layers of court politics and propaganda. Her courtiers had incentives to portray her death as peaceful, reinforcing the image of a controlled and majestic ruler even in her final hours. Likewise, foreign diplomats may have colored their reports to serve their government's interests. Understanding these motivations is essential for interpreting historical evidence, reminding us that even supposedly factual accounts are shaped by perspective, bias, and context. In recent years, some scholars have turned to comparative historical analysis. By examining the deaths of other monarchs in similar contexts, historians can identify patterns in symptom reporting, succession anxiety, and the interplay between illness and political intrigue. Such studies suggest that Elizabeth's death, while unusual for her status and the attention it received, fits within broader trends of Tudor and early Stuart mortality. where age, chronic stress, and limited medical knowledge often intersected with courtly maneuvering. Finally, interdisciplinary approaches, combining history, medicine, and forensic science, have generated new hypotheses. For example, the study of skeletal remains from the period provides insight into the average health, nutrition, and disease burden in Tudor England, offering context for Elizabeth's frailty. While we cannot analyze her body directly, this contextual evidence allows historians to make informed inferences about the conditions she faced. In sum, modern investigations paint a picture of Elizabeth's death that is nuanced and complex. It was likely influenced by a combination of natural aging, chronic stress, and possible infectious disease, but it was also shaped by human perception, political necessity, and historical narrative. The evidence does not definitively confirm foul play, yet the contradictions, rumors, and careful management of information suggest that her final days were far from simple. Elizabeth's death, when viewed through these modern lenses, reinforces the duality of her legacy. A ruler who was both supremely powerful and profoundly human, whose life and death were inseparable from the social, political, and cultural currents of her time. The continuing investigation into her final days reminds us that history is never fixed. It is a puzzle reconstructed from fragments, shaped by new discoveries and forever open to interpretation. So, how did Elizabeth's passing shape England, and what mark did she leave on history beyond her lifetime? The legacy after death. Elizabeth's passing in 1603 did more than mark the end of a monarch's life. It signaled the conclusion of an era. The Elizabethan age had been a period of profound transformation, and her death left a legacy that shaped England politically, culturally, and symbolically for generations. Even in death, Elizabeth's influence continued to resonate. Politically, her passing ended the Tudor dynasty and ushered in the Stuart era with James I. The smooth transition of power was remarkable, considering the decades-long anxiety over succession. Elizabeth had deliberately cultivated James as her successor, ensuring Protestant continuity and avoiding civil strife. Her careful navigation of diplomacy, marriage negotiations, and factional rivalries during her reign meant that England entered the Stuart period with a relatively stable foundation. Yet the shift also marked a change in style. Whereas Elizabeth had personally embodied authority, James would rely more on counsel and patronage, signaling a new approach to monarchy. Culturally, Elizabeth's reign had been transformative. The arts, literature, and theater flourished like never before. Figures such as William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, and Edmund Spenser produced work that defined the period and left a lasting imprint on English identity. Elizabeth herself was a keen patron of the arts, and her court provided the backdrop for some of the most celebrated literary and artistic achievements in English history. Her death did not diminish this cultural legacy. Instead, it solidified her era as a golden age that future monarchs would nostalgically reference and seek to emulate. Elizabeth also left a powerful symbolic legacy. She had cultivated the image of the Virgin Queen, projecting authority, wisdom, and an almost mythical aura. Even in death, this persona endured. Portraits, public memorials, and literary accounts reinforced her image as a ruler who transcended ordinary limitations, a queen whose intelligence and diplomacy had guided England through turbulent times. Her careful construction of public identity meant that her death became a historical symbol of continuity and stability rather than chaos. Her passing also had profound implications for religion in England. Elizabeth had navigated a deeply divided religious landscape, establishing the Elizabethan religious settlement that balanced Protestant and Catholic factions. Her death opened the door for new religious dynamics under James I, but her policies and influence continued to shape debates, practices, and governance long after her passing. In essence, she had left the kingdom in a state where her vision of moderated Protestantism could endure, even as subsequent monarchs faced the challenge of maintaining religious unity. The public response to her death further illustrates her enduring impact. Crowds mourned openly, and chronicles describe a nation collectively grieving the loss of a ruler who had been a constant presence for nearly half a century. Beyond politics and religion, Elizabeth's death resonated on a human level. Subjects felt the loss of a figure who had embodied the identity and pride of England itself. Her passing became an event that transcended personal mortality, entering the realm of national mythology. Even centuries later, Elizabeth's death has inspired fascination, analysis, and myth-making. Historians, authors, and filmmakers continue to explore the circumstances of her passing, the mysteries surrounding her final days, and the political and personal complexities of her life. Her life and death together serve as a case study in power, perception, and human vulnerability, demonstrating that even the most celebrated figures are subject to the limits of the body and the uncertainties of history. Finally, Elizabeth's legacy after death reminds us of the duality of her reign. She was both an extraordinary ruler and a human being. Her careful cultivation of image, her political acumen, and her cultural influence ensured that her story continued to captivate minds long after she was gone. The Virgin Queen may have died, but Elizabeth I, as both a historical figure and an enduring symbol, remained very much alive in the collective memory of England and the wider world. Her death closed a remarkable chapter in English history, blending mystery, intrigue, and human vulnerability. Her life and passing reveal the weight of power, the fragility behind legend, and a legacy that endures in culture, politics, and imagination, reminding us that even the greatest rulers cannot escape mortality. If you liked this video, give us a thumbs up and leave a comment below so we can hear from you too. For more uploads, subscribe to the channel for free.